Welcome to Fall Asleep Through History, Dynasty Decoded. Each night, we take you deep into the darkest corners of the past, where power, betrayal, and tragedy collide. Tonight, you'll hear the story of a queen whose screams echoed through time, and whose blood may have sealed an empire's fate. Chapter 1. The Royal Bloodline That Threatened an Empire. A cold December morning in 1542. Cries pierced the royal chambers of Linlithgow Palace in Scotland. A baby girl had just been born, a girl who would one day threaten the very heart of England's monarchy. Her name was Mary Stuart. Within just 6 days, she would be crowned Queen of Scots, inheriting a kingdom before she even had the strength to open her eyes. But this wasn't just the story of a child queen. It was the beginning of a dangerous Game of Thrones. Mary wasn't just royalty, she was a royal weapon. Her bloodline made her a legitimate heir to the English throne, and that simple fact would haunt the rulers of England for the next 4 decades. Mary was the daughter of James V of Scotland and Marie de Guise, a French noblewoman of powerful lineage. Her father died mere days after her birth, reportedly saying, "It came with a lass, and it will go with a lass," referring to the Scottish crown. Whether those words were prophecy or lamentation, they underscored the fragility of Scotland's future. From the moment of her coronation as an infant, Mary became the centerpiece of international intrigue. Scotland, long caught between the ambitions of England and France, became a battlefield of diplomacy and war. And Mary the baby queen was the pawn both kingdoms were eager to control. Henry VIII of England, ever the opportunist, saw the infant queen as a key to unifying the thrones of England and Scotland. He proposed a marriage between Mary and his son, Edward VI. This union, in Henry's eyes, would bring Scotland under English dominion without another war. But Scotland resisted. The resulting conflict, known as the Rough Wooing, was a series of brutal campaigns that saw English forces ravage Scottish towns in an attempt to force the marriage. To protect Mary from the English threat, the Scots smuggled her to the safety of the French court in 1548. There, she was betrothed to the French Dauphin, Francis, sealing an alliance that angered England and delighted France. Mary was raised in the opulence of the French court, fluent in languages, skilled in diplomacy, and trained to rule. She grew up under the watchful eye of Catherine de' Medici, absorbing the dangerous intricacies of royal power. In 1558, at just 15 years old, Mary married Francis, who became King of France the following year. For a brief moment, Mary was queen of 2 nations. Her influence soared, but fate turned quickly. Francis died in 1560, leaving Mary a widow at 18. The French court, ever pragmatic, cast her aside. With no place left for her in France, she returned to Scotland, a homeland she had not seen since childhood. But Scotland had changed. During her absence, the country had undergone a violent Protestant Reformation. The once Catholic stronghold now bowed to Calvinist preachers like John Knox, who openly condemned Mary as a papist and a Jezebel. The returning queen, Catholic by faith and French in manner, was met with suspicion and scorn. Mary took the throne of Scotland not as a ruler welcomed home, but as a foreign queen in her own land. Her court was divided. Her nobles, many now Protestant, distrusted her, and the people, influenced by fiery sermons and English propaganda, questioned her every move. Still, Mary was intelligent, politically astute, and determined to rule. She sought to balance the religious tensions, allowing Protestants to worship freely while maintaining her own Catholic practices. But her every action was scrutinized, twisted, and whispered about in England. Queen Elizabeth watched closely. The 2 queens could not have been more different. Elizabeth was the product of Henry VIII's break from Rome, a Protestant monarch ruling a fragile England. Mary, on the other hand, was seen by many Catholics as the rightful Queen of England, born of legitimate royal blood through her grandmother, Margaret Tudor, Henry VIII's sister. This bloodline made Mary not just a queen, but a threat. To Elizabeth, Mary was a living claim to her crown, a rallying point for Catholic rebellion. To English Catholics, Mary was hope incarnate, a sovereign who could restore their faith to power. This dynastic rivalry simmered beneath every political move, every marriage proposal, every treaty. And so, 2 queens ruled 2 uneasy kingdoms. Their destinies intertwined by blood, religion, and ambition, one ruled by calculation and caution, the other by divine right and inherited fire. But only one crown could endure. In the shadows of this power struggle, plots would be born, alliances forged, and daggers drawn. And at the center of it all was Mary Stuart, a woman whose very existence posed a question England dared not answer. What happens when the rightful heir wears the wrong faith? The storm was gathering, and Mary, whether she knew it or not, was heading straight into its eye. Chapter 2. The Return of the Queen and the Birth of Scandowin. Mary Stuart stepped ashore at Leith in 1561. The skies were grey, and the wind carried more than sea spray. It carried rumors, expectations, and dread. Scotland's prodigal queen had returned not as the triumphant ruler some had hoped for, but as a Catholic widow of the French king, entering a kingdom now ruled by Protestant doctrine and powerful nobles who saw her as both a relic and a threat. She was only 19. Mary's arrival was met with formal ceremony, but not with celebration. The streets of Edinburgh were cautious. lined with uneasy citizens who had heard the sermons of John Knox, condemning her as a Jezebel and an agent of Rome. Her French entourage, her elegant manners, and her Catholic prayers all set her apart from the rugged, reformed country that now bore little resemblance to the home she had left as a child. From the outset, Mary faced an impossible task: to unify a divided kingdom, rule over a hostile nobility, and survive the storm of international politics with grace and power. She was young, beautiful, and politically shrewd, but she was also surrounded by vipers. One of those vipers was her cousin Queen Elizabeth I. Though the two queens exchanged letters filled with flattery and mutual admiration, beneath the ink lay suspicion, rivalry, and fear. Elizabeth, firmly entrenched on the English throne, viewed Mary as a Catholic threat and a pawn in the greater European game. She refused to recognize Mary as her heir, and more importantly, she refused to offer her the security of political support. Mary, for her part, played the role of the dutiful cousin. She claimed to harbor no ambitions toward the English throne. Though her very existence gave English Catholics reason to hope, she requested Elizabeth's approval to marry, to forge alliances, to stabilize her realm, but Elizabeth denied her at every turn. It was a power play, and Mary knew it, so she took matters into her own hands. In 1565, Mary married Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, an English nobleman with royal Tudor blood and a claim to the English throne. It was, in many ways, a logical union. Their combined lineage strengthened the Stuart claim and created an heir who could unite the thrones of England and Scotland. But it was also a catastrophic mistake. Darnley was handsome, charming and arrogant, vain, and dangerously ambitious. He demanded the crown matrimonial, which would make him co-sovereign of Scotland. Mary refused. Their relationship, once painted as a romantic union of royalty, deteriorated into a battlefield of insults, betrayal, and rage. Darnley quickly allied himself with Protestant nobles and began plotting in the shadows. One of his most brazen acts came in 1566, when he orchestrated the murder of Mary's trusted secretary, David Rizzio. Rizzio, an Italian musician and diplomat, had become Mary's confidant and was rumored wrongly, or rightly, to be her lover. His murder was brutal, dragged from the Queen's supper table and stabbed more than 50 times in front of her eyes. The message was clear. Mary was not in control, and she was surrounded by men who would spill blood to remind her. Yet even as she mourned, Rizzio, and recoiled from Darnley's treachery, Mary knew her greatest weapon was survival. She continued to govern. She gave birth to a son, James, in June 1566, son heir to both Scottish and English thrones. The birth should have been a triumph, but Darnley's paranoia and cruelty overshadowed the moment. Mary grew distant. The nobility whispered. Then, in 1567, Darnley was found dead. His body lay in the garden of a house just outside Edinburgh. The house itself had been destroyed by an explosion, but Darnley showed no signs of death by fire. Instead, he appeared to have been strangled. The murder shocked Scotland, England, and all of Europe. Suspicion turned immediately to James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell, powerful and brash nobleman who had grown close to Mary in the wake of her husband's decline. Rumors spread like wildfire. Had Mary conspired in her husband's death? Had she turned to Bothwell not just for protection, but for passion? Within weeks, Bothwell was acquitted in a suspiciously brief trial. Soon after, he kidnapped Mary on the road to Edinburgh. Whether as a staged abduction or a genuine assault remains debated. Days later, they were married to many. It was a confession by action. The Queen, freshly widowed under violent and mysterious circumstances, had married the man most suspected of orchestrating the crime. The Scottish lords, already wary of Mary's politics and religion, erupted. Nobles who once pledged loyalty now raised arms. The people, stirred by firebrand preachers and propaganda, demanded her removal. Mary's fate was sealed not by a trial, but by betrayal. She was imprisoned at Loch Leven Castle, forced to abdicate in favor of her infant son, James VI. Bothwell fled into exile, eventually dying in a Danish prison. Mad and forgotten, the woman who had once been Queen of France and Queen of Scots was now a captive. But she was not done. For Mary Stuart still had one weapon left, her royal blood, and across the border in England. Her cousin Elizabeth was watching. The queen without a throne had become a queen with a claim. Chapter 3. The Prisoner and the Plot. Mary Stuart's imprisonment at Loch Leven Castle marked a dramatic fall from grace. Once the crowned queen of two nations, she was now held captive in a cold fortress on an island in the middle of a Scottish loch. Her world had shrunk to stone walls, guarded gates, and whispers carried across water. But queens do not surrender easily. Loch Leven Castle was meant to be both a prison and a tomb for Mary's political future. Her captors, the Protestant Scottish lords, believed they had extinguished the flame of Catholic monarchy in their realm. By forcing her to abdicate in favor of her infant son, James VI, they hoped to control the future of Scotland without further unrest. But the woman they imprisoned was no ordinary queen. She was cunning, educated, and still held the loyalty of many. Mary spent nearly a year in confinement. During that time, she suffered deeply, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Reports suggest she may have miscarried twins during her captivity. Though details remain uncertain, what is known is that she grew frailer, and yet her spirit remained unbroken. In May 1568, with the help of loyal sympathizers, Mary escaped Loch Leven. Disguised and ferried across the loch, she reached the mainland and quickly rallied an army of supporters. Her escape sent shockwaves through Scotland and England. The Queen was no longer contained, she was moving. Just days later, her forces clashed with those of the ruling regent at the Battle of Langside. It was a disaster. Mary's army, ill-prepared and outnumbered, was crushed. She fled the field in disguise, riding for miles without rest. Her destination was unthinkable. She crossed the border into England, to the astonishment of Elizabeth and her court. Mary placed herself in the hands of the very woman who feared her most. She claimed sanctuary. She asked for protection. She hoped for justice. But Elizabeth saw danger. Instead of offering a royal welcome, Elizabeth ordered Mary into protective custody. For the next 19 years, Mary would be held in various castles and manors across England, never tried, never freed, never ignored. Her presence was a thorn in the side of the English crown to Catholic Europe. She remained the true queen. To English Catholics, she was a martyr in waiting. To Elizabeth, she was a living invitation to rebellion. Plots began to fester. From the Ridolfi plot in 1571 to the Throckmorton plot in 1583, Mary's name appeared again and again in coded letters, secret meetings, and whispered promises of foreign invasions. Whether she initiated these conspiracies or was merely their figurehead remains debated. What is certain is that Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, made it his mission to prove Mary guilty beyond doubt. He was a master of espionage, deception, and manipulation. Under his watch, a web of informants, forgers, and codebreakers formed the first modern intelligence service. He read Mary's letters before she did. He set traps, he forged bait. Then came the Babington plot in 1586. Anthony Babington, a young English Catholic noble, began corresponding with Mary through smuggled letters hidden in beer barrels. The letters spoke of rebellion, of assassinating Elizabeth, of placing Mary on the throne. What Babington didn't know was that Walsingham was reading every word. Mary responded in her reply. She seemed to approve the plan. That was all Walsingham needed. The original letter was intercepted, copied, and preserved. When Mary sealed her fate with ink, the crown sealed its justification for execution. In August 1586, the plotters were arrested and brutally executed. Mary was moved to Fothering Castle, a lonely, wind-battered fortress far from courtly sympathy. In October, she was tried by a commission of English nobles. She defended herself with eloquence, claiming she was denied legal counsel, denied access to her original letters, denied the basic rights of justice. It didn't matter. The verdict had already been written. Mary was found guilty of treason against the Queen of England, but still, Elizabeth hesitated. She had killed nobles, she had executed rivals, but Mary was different. Mary was an anointed queen, chosen by God and crowned by bishops. Killing her was not just murder, it was regicide, and it could set a precedent that no monarch wanted. Elizabeth delayed. She sent letters. She gave ambiguous orders. She waited for Parliament to act. But pressure mounted. Catholics in Spain and France grew restless. English Protestants demanded security. Elizabeth's advisors demanded closure. And so, with trembling reluctance, Elizabeth signed the death warrant. She would later claim it was done without her final consent. But history had already moved. Chapter 4. The Axe and the Aftermath. It was a grey winter morning on February 8, 1587. The air around Fothering Castle hung heavy with frost and finality. Inside its stone walls, servants lit candles and draped black cloths. Outside, guards lined the courtyard, their faces grim and unreadable. The Queen of Scots was about to die. Mary Stuart had been awakened early. She had spent most of the night in prayer. She was calm, dignified, dressed in black, as custom dictated for a condemned prisoner. But beneath the cloak, she wore crimson, the color of martyrdom in the Catholic tradition. It was no accident. She knew what this moment meant. She walked steadily into the great hall. Her steps echoed. Spectators, courtiers, guards, and executioners filled the room, yet silence followed her. This was no ordinary execution. It was an act of political annihilation, religious defiance, and dynastic finality. A Protestant minister offered prayers. Mary declined. She knelt. Clutching her crucifix, she recited Catholic psalms in Latin. Her final words included a prayer for the souls of all faithful Christians, and a plea for the forgiveness of her enemies. Then, she laid her head on the block. The executioner raised his axe. The room held its breath. The first blow missed her neck and struck the back of her head. She did not scream, but a muffled cry or breath escaped her lips. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The second blow landed properly, but failed to fully sever her head. The third completed the task. And then a final horror. The executioner grasped Mary's head by the hair, raised it high, and declared, "God save the Queen." But her head slipped from his hands. Her hair was a wig. The graying skull dropped to the floor. Her body slumped, and from under her garments, a small dog crawled out, her faithful companion, hidden in her dress. The room was stunned. This was not a clean execution. This was not triumph, it was spectacle and shame. Word traveled fast. In England, there was mourning and fear, abroad outrage, in Rome and Madrid fury, in France sorrow, in Scotland, confusion, and in London. Queen Elizabeth claimed she had not meant for the warrant to be carried out so soon. She wept, or so it was said. She dismissed her secretary, William Davison, accusing him of acting without clear instruction, but few believed her. The queen, who ruled with unmatched caution, had finally allowed an irreversible act, and the cost was enormous. Mary's execution transformed her from prisoner to martyr. Her crimson dress, her whispered prayers, and the butchery of the axe became legend. Catholics saw her as a saint felled by Protestant cruelty. Monarchs across Europe reeled, even some Protestants felt unease. Elizabeth, for all her power, knew the line she had crossed. She had killed an anointed queen. And though Mary had posed a threat, she had also been Elizabeth's cousin, Pierre, and rival. Her death left a silence in the world of queens. But death did not end Mary's influence. Her son, James VI of Scotland, now had a mother martyred by the English crown. He made no move against Elizabeth, not then. He was pragmatic, cautious, and ambitious. And when Elizabeth died childless in 1603, it was James who inherited her throne. The child of Mary Stuart became James I of England, the very union Elizabeth had feared. The dynastic merge she had spent decades avoiding occurred not through war or treaty, but through blood and death. Mary's execution may have been intended to silence a voice, erase a threat, and secure a kingdom. But it did the opposite. It made her eternal. Her story lived on in paintings, poetry, songs, and myths. In Catholic iconography, she became a symbol of piety and persecution. In Protestant England, she remained a figure of controversies, both villain and victim. Even now, centuries later, the sound of that axe echoes through history. Was she guilty of treason, or the victim of a political trap? Was Elizabeth justified, or haunted by regret? History does not answer, it only remembers. Chapter 5. The Legacy of Two Queens, Mary Stuart and Elizabeth. Tudor were bound by more than blood. Their rivalry transcended politics and religion. It became a legend, a clash, not just between queens, but between visions of power, faith, and womanhood. Their choices shaped the fate of nations. Their ghosts still linger in the shadow of monarchy. After Mary's execution, Elizabeth's court entered a period of uneasy calm. There were no parades, no proclamations of triumph. Elizabeth had rid herself of a dangerous rival, but at a cost few could measure. The crown was intact, but the conscience of a queen was not. Elizabeth's reputation as a ruler was defined in part by this act. Some called it necessary, others whispered of cold cruelty. She had long cultivated the image of the Virgin Queen, wise, restrained, merciful. Yet in condemning Mary, she revealed her capacity for ruthless survival. Mary, in death, achieved what she could not in life: immortality. Within weeks of her execution, ballads were sung in her name. Secret Catholic gatherings commemorated her as a martyr. Artists painted her final moments, cloaking her in holy symbolism. Across Catholic Europe, Mary Stuart became a spiritual weapon. Her blood invoked in calls for vengeance and redemption. In Protestant England, her story was rewritten, sanitized in some tellings, vilified in others. To the ruling elite, she had been a traitor. To some poets and playwrights, she was a tragic heroine. William Shakespeare never named her in his works, but the echoes of her story are felt in every royal tragedy he penned. But the true legacy of Mary and Elizabeth lies not in art, but in succession. Mary's son, James VI of Scotland, had watched from afar as his mother fell from power. He had learned early to walk carefully among ambitious lords and religious factions. When Elizabeth died in 1603 without an heir, James was summoned to London. The throne that Elizabeth had fought to protect against Mary and all her Catholic supporters was passed to Mary's own flesh and blood. James became James I of England, uniting the crowns of Scotland and England. For the first time, the British Isles were ruled by one sovereign. Mary's bloodline now sat on the throne Elizabeth had once sworn she would never share. The irony was not lost on Europe. The Tudor line ended. The Stuart line continued. James honored his mother quietly. He ordered a grand tomb for her at Westminster Abbey, just steps away from Elizabeth herself. Two queens who never stood face to face in life were now buried under the same roof. Tourists still visit their resting places, reading the inscriptions, imagining the weight of history between them. Their relationship was defined not by meetings but by letters. Over 30 years, they exchanged dozens of correspondences, sometimes warm, sometimes wary. Mary often addressed Elizabeth as sister or cousin, while Elizabeth responded with caution, evasion, or silence. The letters became a psychological battleground, a shadow war of ink and implication. Some historians believe Elizabeth feared Mary not merely for her claim, but for her charisma. Mary had been raised in the grandeur of the French court, fluent in multiple languages, beloved by many. She had the bearing of a queen and the loyalty of those who still dreamed of a Catholic England. Elizabeth, by contrast, ruled through calculation. She trusted few, married none, and used ambiguity as a weapon. Where Mary leaned into emotion and passion, Elizabeth wielded control and delay. Their styles clashed as sharply as their politics, and yet, there is something hauntingly similar in their loneliness. Both women spent much of their reigns surrounded by men who questioned their authority, undermined their choices, and plotted their downfalls. Both faced impossible expectations rule as women in a man's world. With virtue and ferocity in equal measure, both were subjects of rumors, obsessions, and fears. And both, in the end, were alone. Elizabeth died unmarried, childless, and surrounded by silence. Mary died in a foreign land, condemned by a cousin she never met. Neither woman achieved peace in life, but both achieved legend in death. Today, they are studied side by side, compared endlessly in books, films, and classrooms. One is remembered as a cunning ruler, the other as a doomed queen. But the truth is more complicated. Elizabeth's crown rested on fragile compromise. Mary's fall was written the day she was born. Their legacies are not just about religion or power. They are about survival, sacrifice, and the cost of being a woman with a crown. One chose solitude to keep power. The other chose love and lost everything. And in the end, both were buried in stone, while their stories were carved into history. Chapter 6. The Faith That Divided a Kingdom. Long before Mary Stuart and Elizabeth Tudor ever exchanged letters, their kingdoms were already bleeding over faith. The Reformation had set the world on fire, and the flames would eventually engulf both queens. At the heart of their conflict was not only a question of lineage, but of religion, a fierce, often violent battle between Catholicism and Protestantism. It was a war of doctrine, yes, but also of identity, loyalty, and control. To choose a faith was to choose a side, and in 16th century Britain, neutrality was treason. Mary Stuart was born into Catholicism, baptized and raised in the faith of her ancestors. Her identity was bound to Rome and the traditions of the Church. Her time in France only reinforced it. There, Catholicism wasn't just a religion, it was monarchy's divine shield. Popes crowned kings, saints guarded dynasties, and heresy was treason against God. But while Mary was being groomed as a Catholic queen in the palaces of France, Scotland was changing. A storm of sermons and swords swept through the Scottish lowlands. The Protestant Reformation, sparked by Martin Luther and carried forward by John Calvin, had reached the shores of Scotland. Through fiery preachers like John Knox, Scotland's nobility, frustrated with corruption in the Catholic Church and seduced by promises of land and independence from Rome, turned their allegiance. By the time Mary returned to her homeland in 1561, the country she had left as a Catholic stronghold had become a Protestant battlefield. The monasteries were stripped, the Latin masses were gone, and the people were divided. Mary attempted balance. She allowed Protestants to worship freely. She retained Catholic rites in her own chapel, but refused to impose them on others. This tolerance, however, satisfied no one. To Protestants, she was a symbol of foreign interference and popish idolatry. To Catholic loyalists, she seemed too conciliatory, too soft, too willing to compromise with heretics. In trying to bridge the divide, Mary found herself isolated from both sides. Elizabeth, meanwhile, had forged her own uneasy peace. Her 1559 Act of Uniformity established the Church of England, a Protestant institution with a Catholic aesthetic. Her famous quote, "I do not want to make windows into men's souls," reflected her pragmatic approach. Outward conformity was demanded, private belief less so. But the facade of peace was fragile. Elizabeth's England was constantly threatened by Catholic plots, foreign invasion, and internal rebellion. The Pope excommunicated her in 1570, effectively encouraging her assassination. Catholic recusants were fined, imprisoned, and sometimes executed. Protestantism became national identity, and Catholicism a whisper in the dark. This religious war wasn't just theology, it was policy, propaganda, and espionage. Every priest might be a spy, every mass a conspiracy. The Babington plot, which sealed Mary's fate, was driven by faith as much as power. The letters spoke of rescuing the Catholic queen, assassinating the heretic Elizabeth, and restoring the true religion. Walsingham, Elizabeth's spy master, weaponized this fanaticism to justify Mary's execution. But the religious divide outlived both queens. When James VI and I took the throne of England in 1603, hopes were high for reconciliation. He had been raised Protestant, but his mother's blood stirred expectations. Some Catholics believed he would ease their suffering. Some Protestants feared betrayal. James, like Elizabeth, he authorized the New English Bible, sought to suppress both extremes, and maintained the Church of England, but the old wounds festered. The Gunpowder Plot of 1605, an attempt by Catholic conspirators to blow up Parliament, proved that faith could still ignite treason. Centuries later, the echoes of that division remain. The legacy of Mary and Elizabeth is etched into cathedrals, graveyards, and stained glass. Their names are invoked in histories of religious freedom and persecution alike. The debate over their faiths, sincere or strategic, dogmatic or diplomatic, continues to animate scholars. But the truth may lie somewhere in between. Mary never renounced her faith. She died clutching a crucifix, declaring herself the servant of God and Rome. Elizabeth, though a Protestant icon, never disavowed her Catholic past. She walked a tightrope, forever balancing between principle and power. Their choices shaped the fate of nations. Their battle was not just for crowns, but for souls. Chapter 7. sons of queens, sons of fate, in the halls of power. Bloodlines speak louder than words, and in the story of Mary Queen of Scots and Elizabeth I, the echoes of their reigns would thunder into the life of the son who inherited the legacy of both queens. James VI of Scotland, later James I of England, was the child of Mary Stuart and Henry Stuart. Lord Darnley, from birth, he was a symbol of unity and division, a royal heir to two thrones bound by centuries of conflict. But while James bore the blood of both Tudors and Stuarts, his upbringing and rule would reveal how fate shaped by two very different queens forged a monarch of paradoxes. James was only 1 year old when his mother was forced to abdicate. She had been imprisoned at Loch Leven Castle, betrayed by her nobles, and stripped of her crown. As she wept and signed the abdication, her infant son was crowned King of Scots. James would grow up never knowing her as a mother, only as a memory, and eventually, a legend that instead of maternal care, James received political grooming. He was raised under the watch of powerful Protestant regents, who sought to mold him into the perfect monarch for a reformed Scotland. Tutors, such as George Buchanan, instilled in him a deep knowledge of theology, governance, and rhetoric. He was taught the dangers of tyranny, the power of divine right, and the necessity of balance. He was taught, subtly and directly, to distrust his mother's choices. And yet, Mary's shadow never left him. He knew who she was. He read her letters. He heard the whispers dotting, though he rarely spoke of her. When Elizabeth finally signed Mary's death warrant in 1587, James did not retaliate. He did not protest. He said little at all. Historians have debated this silence. Was it cowardice, strategy, or a son's quiet rage contained beneath royal restraint? The truth is likely this. James had learned from his mother's fall. He understood that survival required patience. His loyalty was not to vengeance but to ambition. That ambition would be fulfilled in 1603. When Elizabeth died without an heir, James was her closest legitimate relative. After years of delicate diplomacy, careful positioning, and strategic silence, he received the summons he had prepared for his entire life. He became King James I of England. For the first time, Scotland and England were ruled by the same monarch. Mary's son now sat on the throne of the woman who had executed her. The union that had been denied by war, by policy, by religion, was sealed in blood. James entered London not as a conqueror, but as a reconciler. He promised peace, he spoke of unity, he rebranded himself as the bringer of stability between two nations long at odds. The Tudor legacy had ended with a queen who had no children. The Stuart legacy began with the child of a queen who had died in captivity. But James was no idealized heir. He was intelligent, fluent in Latin, theology, and statecraft. He was also insecure, eccentric, and prone to favoritism. His court was filled with tension. His attempts at religious tolerance fell flat with both Catholics and Puritans. His vision of divine right monarchy clashed with the growing power of Parliament. Still, James gave England the King James Bible, one of the most influential texts in Western history. He survived conspiracies like the Gunpowder Plot. He kept England out of major European wars. He solidified the Stuart dynasty, passing the throne to his son Charles. But perhaps his greatest legacy was symbolic. In James, the two queens lived on: the ruthlessness of Elizabeth, the elegance of Mary, the political finesse of one, the romantic tragedy of the other. He was their synthesis and their contradiction. He buried his mother in Westminster Abbey with full honors. Her tomb stands today near Elizabeth's. The two queens who fought over legitimacy, over faith, over the soul of Britain, now lie in the same sanctuary. Sons often carry the burdens of their mothers. James carried the weight of nations. In doing so, he reshaped the monarchy, inherited the conflicts of his past, and charted a path toward a new British identity. His reign may not have been golden, but it was the beginning of something enduring, a kingdom united under one crown. And it all began with a mother whose head fell beneath an English axe. Chapter 8. The Queen in the Mirror. History remembers Mary Stuart and Elizabeth Tudor as opposites, martyr and monarch, romantic and realist, impulsive and restrained. But to understand their legacy, we must see them not as symbols, but as women trapped by crowns, circled by enemies, and haunted by reflections of each other. They never met face to face, though their lives revolved around one another. Yet across borders and decades, they engaged in a psychological duel, conducted in letters, rumors, and politics. Each queen served as the other's mirror, distorted reflection of what could have been. Mary, the daughter of kings, raised in the elegance of the French court, embraced a world of ceremony, Catholic devotion, and dynastic pride. She believed in divine right and followed her heart in matters of love and alliance. She married 3 times, each union drawing her closer to ruin. She trusted easily, she forgave recklessly, and she suffered greatly. Elizabeth, born under scandal and crowned through calculation, learned early that love was dangerous and trust was fatal. She never married. She named herself the Virgin Queen and ruled with intellect sharpened by fear. She delayed decisions. She maneuvered with caution. And though she held power for decades, she lived and died alone. Each queen envied the other. Mary longed for Elizabeth's stability and recognition. She wanted the English crown not only by right, but by acknowledgement. She wanted her cousin to say aloud what bloodlines made plain. She wanted safety. Elizabeth, for all her strength, may have envied Mary's confidence in love, her beauty, her certainty. She watched her cousin's charm and influence with suspicion, but perhaps also with quiet longing. Elizabeth had many suitors, but no equal. Mary, though doomed, had tasted union even in tragedy. Their correspondence was filled with flattery veiling threats, affection masking dread. They called each other sister while plotting each other's downfall. Mary sent portraits. Elizabeth sent silence. Mary asked to meet. Elizabeth refused. It was not just politics. It was fear of exposure, of emotion, of weakness. They were women in a world of men, and their rivalry was shaped not just by power, but by perception. Each was judged more harshly because she wore a crown and a dress. Elizabeth's virginity became political currency. Mary's sexuality became political crime. Elizabeth's restraint was called wisdom. Mary's emotion, folly. One sacrificed intimacy for power. The other lost power for intimacy, but both ruled longer and more effectively than many of their male counterparts. Both endured betrayal, rebellion, and pressure no king would have survived, and both were human. In their private writings, there are glimpses of vulnerability. Mary's pleas to Elizabeth reveal desperation and hope. Elizabeth's responses reveal anxiety and calculation. Behind their thrones stood two women born to rule but not to rest. Their lives were parallel lines that never crossed, but always converged in meaning. In Mary, Elizabeth saw what she could become if she faltered. In Elizabeth, Mary saw what she might have been if she'd been colder. And in the end, Elizabeth signed the death warrant. Not just for a rival, but perhaps for a part of herself she feared most. After Mary's execution, Elizabeth never truly recovered. Her grief was real, at least her guilt. She distanced herself from the decision. She punished her secretary. But history does not forget. They are now buried near one another in Westminster Abbey, two queens, two cousins, two women, judged by history and by each other. Look closely at their stories, and you will find not enemies, but reflections. Chapter 9. The myths that made them immortal, with their bodies laid to rest in Westminster Abbey. Mary Stuart and Elizabeth Tudor entered a new realm, not one of politics or power, but of myth. In death, their rivalry, decisions, and identities were reshaped by poets, painters, playwrights, and politicians. Their truths dissolved into stories, their legacies became legend. Few historical figures have inspired as many conflicting portraits as these two queens. One was cast as the fallen angel, the other as the warrior queen. One, the Catholic martyr in red, executed by her heretic cousin. The other, the Protestant savior, burdened with ruling a fractious realm. These roles became canonical in different cultures, and useful for different causes. In Catholic Europe, Mary was elevated to near sainthood. Her crimson dress at the scaffold became sacred cloth, her crucifix a symbol of faith under fire. Artists painted her with halos, her execution reimagined as passion. Poems mourned her innocence, her royal suffering, and her steadfast piety. She was not just mourned, she was exalted. In Protestant England, Elizabeth became Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the bringer of national unity and defiance against Catholic tyranny. Her long reign was mythologized as a golden age of stability, exploration, and enlightenment. She was framed as the wise ruler who resisted foreign threats and male manipulation. Statues and portraits enshrined her in imperious majesty. And yet both myths conceal as much as they reveal. Mary, though pious and passionate, made grave political miscalculations. Her marriages were disastrous. Her reliance on untrustworthy men weakened her rule. Her final alliance with Bothwell, whether forced or chosen, ruined her public image and gave her enemies ammunition. She may have been wronged, but she was not without fault. Elizabeth, though brilliant and resolute, ruled with cold calculation. Her court was filled with manipulation. Her spy network ruthless. She delayed decisions not always from wisdom, but from fear. She left no clear succession, and her obsession with image sometimes overtook policy. Her virginity, immortalized in propaganda, was a tool of state as much as personal choice. And still, the myths persist. Modern film, fiction, and stage have continued the myth-making, from operas to Hollywood dramas. Mary and Elizabeth are reimagined again and again. Sometimes, Mary is a tragic heroine, sometimes a reckless schemer. Elizabeth is portrayed as either the strong ruler or the emotionally stunted virgin monarch. Rarely are they both shown in full complexity. Even the 2018 film Mary Queen of Scots played on this tension, creating an imagined meeting between the queens that never happened. But that audiences long for. We crave confrontation. We crave clarity. History, however, offers only fragments in a way. The myths of Mary and Elizabeth have outlived their politics because they speak to something deeper. They are avatars of archetypes. Love versus logic, heart versus head, surrender versus survival. They reflect the impossible expectations placed on women in power, then and now. They symbolize how history punishes passion and rewards restraint until, of course, the narrative needs to reverse. But myths are powerful because they carry truth even. When they distort facts, Mary did die for what she believed, even if she made poor choices along the way. Elizabeth did preserve her nation. Even if she ruled with icy distance, their conflict reminds us that leadership is not clean, it is brutal, lonely, and often tragic. And so the world remembers them on coins, in classrooms, in coronation halls, and Netflix queues, not because they were perfect, but because they were unforgettable. Two women, two crowns. One story split in two. One final chapter remains the reckoning. Chapter 10. The Final Judgment. Time is the ultimate historian. It softens the edges of guilt, blurs the lines of blame, and leaves behind only the echoes loud enough to last. In the case of Mary Stuart and Elizabeth Tudor, centuries of debate, dramatization, and division have done little to quiet those echoes. Their story endures not because of what they did, but because of what they forced the world to confront. Who deserves the crown? The one born with a bloodline, or the one who holds it with strength? The one who suffers for her faith, or the one who sacrifices everything to preserve peace? Mary died beneath an axe, her head severed, her dog whimpering beneath her skirts. Elizabeth died in her bed, old and alone, the last of her line. One ended in violence, the other in silence, but both died surrounded by ghosts. The final judgment on these two queens may never be unanimous, but it must be honest. Mary Stuart was not merely a victim. She was reckless in marriage, unwise in alliance, and often blind to danger. But she was also brave, loyal to her conscience, and unshaken in her faith. She ruled with her heart and paid for it with her life. Elizabeth Tudor was not merely a hero. She wielded power with chilling precision, manipulated trust, and delayed justice until it suited her throne. But she also preserved her realm, navigated treacherous waters, and shaped the foundation of a modern monarchy. She ruled with her mind and paid for it with her soul. Each woman made the best decisions they could, within the cage of their gender, their era, and their lineage. Each bore the unbearable burden of being not just sovereigns but symbols. Every move they made was scrutinized by foreign courts, suspicious ministers, and an unforgiving public. They were not born to be ordinary, they were born to be measured. And so, we measure them still, in classrooms and churches, on stages and screens. Their images evolve, they are dissected, debated, reimagined. They become feminist icons, cautionary tales, saints, and sinners. But perhaps their truest form is neither myth nor villain. Perhaps they are simply women who were not allowed to be human. In Westminster Abbey, they lie under stone, their effigies carved in cold perfection, forever regal, forever unreachable. But beneath that stone lies something far more complex: ambition, heartbreak, betrayal, courage, failure, and endurance. Final judgment does not belong to one court, one historian, or one faith. It belongs to time and, to us, what we choose to remember, what we choose to forget, and what we choose to learn. Because in the end, Mary Queen of Scots and Elizabeth I were not just two queens locked in opposition. They were two women who carried the weight of the world. And that, perhaps, is judgment enough.